at Soar High School in Antelope Valley. And we have scheduled this event so that I have a chance to share some of my knowledge about how you make it through challenging situations. We are in a challenging time. You probably hear that all the time. It's unprecedented. You probably hear that all the time. And it's not so much that the world hasn't dealt with pandemics before. We have dealt with pandemics before, but not when the world was so globally connected. And that's probably one of the reasons why the virus, the COVID-19, spread so wide and so quickly, is that we're globally connected and we're flying from country to country to country in a matter of hours. So it's not so much the question of the pandemic and is it a new situation, is it an unusual situation, but what are the tools that an individual needs to get through it? Because even if the world did not encounter a pandemic or a global challenge, each of us as individuals may face challenges in our lives, and it's important to know how you deal with those challenges. I myself experienced that, and that's what I'm sharing today. I became blind when I was 4 years old. I was running backwards and fell on my head. I was running on the sidewalk in front of my house, and I fell on my head, and it caused an injury to my head. And that was taken care of by the doctors, and they sent me home. My mother discovered that something else was wrong because I was then bumping into the walls and bumping into furniture and knocking stuff over. And my mother realized that something else must be wrong. So she took me back to the hospital, and that's when they discovered that I was completely blind. I had surgery to restore the sight in my right eye, and I was able to see well enough that I went to school with my brothers and sisters. I read regular printed material, but I only did that 1 year. I did that in first grade. In the summer between first and second grade, I lost some more of my sight, and I had to read large print materials. So I was sent to a different school, not the school in my neighborhood, but a school that was a little further away, where the textbooks were available in large print. And there I went to school for second grade, third grade, fourth grade. In the middle of fourth grade, I lost some more of that sight that had been restored in my right eye. So I couldn't read the large print books anymore. They kept me in the school. They didn't want to interrupt the school year with taking me out of the school. So I continued in the school with the teachers rewriting everything for me, my spelling words, my arithmetic problems, things of that sort. The teacher would rewrite in a larger print so that I could see them and work the problems and do the other homework. I did that till the end of the fourth grade, and then I had to go to a school for the blind where I learned Braille. So that was in 1962 that I started learning Braille. Still could see. I could still see well enough to see colors until I was 16 years old. I did not start using a cane for mobility until I was 17. And I saw light until I was 24. So since age 24, I have not been able to see anything at all. They never did restore sight to my left eye. It was only to my right eye they had restored sight. and then I eventually lost it over time, as I just explained. But in my experience as a blind person growing up in a sighted world, I had some challenges that I had to deal with. And I still overcame those challenges and accomplished what I did. So let me talk a little bit about what I did, just briefly. I graduated from high school, John Marshall High School, and at John Marshall, this was in Los Angeles, they had a Braille department. So we had 18 blind students at Marshall while I was there. So it was a regular high school, 2,000 students, 18 of them were blind. I went, after graduating from high school, I attended Yale University, where I majored in math, and I got a degree in math. I got my bachelor's degree in math, but decided I wanted to do law instead of math. So I went to law school. I went to USC Law School. And after graduating from USC Law School, I took the bar exam and started practicing law, and eventually became a judge. I worked as a judge for 29 years before I retired. I retired in 2010, and I've devoted most of my time since then to volunteering at Soar High School and doing motivational speaking around the world. I've had a chance to travel to countries such as China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Canada, South Africa, Australia, giving speeches. And that's what I really enjoy, of course, is giving motivational speeches to help individuals. It's more about each individual, how you manage to get through the challenges of life, the changes in life. So I'm going to talk about, and there are 4 words I want to focus on, and I'd like for you to keep in mind: challenge, change, can, and cause. Challenge, change, can, and cause. So let's start with the notion of challenge. Challenge is something that we all face. Every one of us will face challenges. This COVID-19 is a challenge that we all face together. And that's the unusual part of it. It's a single challenge that all of us face, and it presents new situations for everybody, from the president down to the guy who collects our trash. Everybody faces this challenge. Now, when I was growing up, my challenge, as I mentioned earlier, was about being blind. And it is a challenge, but it's more of a challenge, it seems, to other people than it is for me. What makes it, for me, a challenge is the questions that other people have about my ability. But what I have learned to do is to see challenge as an opportunity. Challenge is a test to help you discover more of what your abilities are. Because, I mean, we call it a challenge because we're presented with situations that call for an extra effort on our part, or it calls extra creativity, or it calls for some extra time. And so the situation challenges us in that way. But I think it's important to look at challenge as a test of your abilities, testing you. So I didn't have the use of my eyes. So the challenge is, how do I use my ears? How do I use my nose? How do I use my mouth? How do I use the touch of my hands or my sense of touch in order to overcome that challenge and still accomplish what I want to accomplish? And I was able to do that. So I want to tell you a story about something that my son said. My son, when he was 14 years old, he was attending, he was attending New Vista Middle School at the time, New Vista Middle School in Lancaster, when the family decided that my wife would move to Indiana to attend graduate school. She was going to Indiana University. And we decided to send the two younger children. I have 4 children, and the 2 older children had already graduated from high school and they were going off to college. But I had 2 younger children who were going to go to Indiana with their mom. So when we were talking, we had a family meeting to talk about the situation, and we hadn't revealed to the kids what the change was going to be, but we had a family meeting to talk about it. And the family meeting, my son wanted to know. He says, "Come on, Dad, tell me, what's the family meeting about?" And I said, "I can't tell you. You have to wait till your mom comes back." She was going to get our youngest one. The youngest one was at a friend's house. My mother was her mother was going to get her to bring her back to be part of the family meeting. And so my son kept trying to squeeze the information out of me while we waited. And then he finally said, "Dad, I tell you what, if it's about moving, I'm all for it." Now, I was surprised by that because we hadn't talked about moving. I don't think we gave any hints that it had to do with moving. So I wanted to know why he was all for it. And he said, "Dad, don't you know when you change your environment, you change your opportunities. When you change your environment, you change your opportunities." That's what he said. Now, I thought that was wonderful words of wisdom. And I was thinking, well, maybe he was at one of my speeches and he heard me say that. But I couldn't remember any of the speeches that I had given if I had ever said that before. So it was wonderful words of wisdom that came from Anton when he was 14 years old. And so change is not something that we should be worried about. Now, I find myself in this presentation, I switched to change. I was talking about challenge, and all of a sudden I switched to change. So now I'm going to put those 2 things together. So a lot of people are challenged by change. They don't like change. They want things to remain as they are. But that's not what happens. That's not what happens in life. If you didn't change, you would always be in high school, for example. Actually, if you didn't change, you wouldn't make it to high school. You would be in middle school or elementary school. Change is a natural process about life, and you shouldn't resist change. You shouldn't fear change. You shouldn't. What you should do is look for the benefit that comes from the change. And that's the same when we talk about challenge. Look for the benefit that comes from challenge. Now, I wrote a book, it's about 23 years ago now. My first book, I've written 4 books, but my first book that I wrote is a book, it's called The Soul's Mirror, Reflections on the Fullness of Life. And it's a book in which I talk about situations in my life and what lessons I learned from them. And I happen to, I wrote about challenge. So I am going to, if I may, I'm going to read what I wrote about challenge 23 years ago. I'm going to be reading from my Braille book. I still use Braille. Most of the time, I use a computer with voice synthesizer so that I actually listen to the computer. But from time to time, I still use Braille. And that's what I'm going to do now when I find the, so what I'm going to read challenge, and then I'm going to read change after I summarize challenge. So here's what I wrote about challenge. And I wrote in first person, so it was my lesson. It was about my lesson and what I learned from it. And I think it's important here. On challenge. I have yet to meet a person who has not faced a challenge of one sort or another. Inevitably, each of us will find him or herself in a situation that calls for a stronger effort, that demands creativity and approach, and or that tests the strength of one's will. So since we all face them at one time or another, the question is not the challenge, but rather the response. When I'm in a difficult a difficult spot, I should allow myself to bemoan the unfortunate situation. Balance with body, mind, and soul requires the emotional release. But I must not wallow in self-pity. I must remember the objective of my efforts and the success for which I strive. Then I can analyze the challenge with which I am confronted to find in it the opportunity that will move me forward once again. I can talk to someone about the problem to help relieve my frustration and to readjust my focus from the challenge to the opportunity. However, I should share my concerns only with those who will encourage me to move on, and not with one who will eagerly invite me into his or her company of misery. I do not always have control over the events that occur in my life, but I can control my responses to them. I can ensure that the challenging circumstances are temporary. Even when I have a permanent condition such as the loss of sight, my adaptation to that condition makes it no longer a challenge. And that's what I found in my life. I adapted to the fact that I was blind. It was going to be a permanent situation. There was no prospect that I was going to see again. And I never found myself asking or pitying myself because I was blind. In fact, people ask me, they say, if you had the chance, would you want to see again? And my response always is, well, maybe, under one condition. And they said, what condition is that? And that would be the condition that if I didn't like what I see, I'd have the opportunity to become blind once again. I've adjusted to my blindness, and it's no longer a challenge. You can look at your situation, whatever the situation you're in. Maybe it's the COVID-19. Maybe you have friends or family who are seriously affected by it, either health-wise or in a job. Uh, Maybe it's other conditions that you face even before COVID-19, a disability, financial situation, a social situation, bullying. Whatever those challenges are, you can overcome those challenges. Use it as a test to find out the strength in you, and then use that strength to keep moving forward. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about challenge, and try to keep these concepts separate so it's easy to understand. Rosie, do you think should I take questions from segment to segment or do the whole thing first?
I think you can just go ahead and do the whole thing. We can take questions at the end.
You said go ahead and do the next segment?
Yes.
Okay, so let's finish up change. I already told the story about change, and in change, there's opportunity. Let me finish the idea though. Remember, it was my son that said, when you change your environment, you change your opportunities. That's what he said. And he experienced that very same thing. My son is a dancer. He is now a professional dancer. And when he was in school, when he was in middle school and high school, he participated in dancing. And he tried out to be part of the dance team for the LA Sparks. That's the women's professional basketball team in Los Angeles. He auditioned for the Sparks, and he was rejected. When he moved to Indiana, he decided to audition for the Indiana Fever, which is the women's professional basketball team there in Indiana. Well, he made it. He was accepted in Indiana. And so his summer job while he was going to high school in Indiana was to dance at the Indiana Fever games. So during their halftime shows and things of that sort, he danced. That was his high school summer job. So my point here is, and his proof, that when you change your environment, you change your opportunities. So it's important not to resist change or fight change. What's going to happen with COVID-19? Things are going to change. Guaranteed, they're changed now. I mean, now the high school students are not in high school. Some adults, a lot of adults are not at work because they tell you to stay home. By the way, they tell you stay home. That doesn't necessarily mean stay inside the house. It's nice weather now in Antelope Valley. You can go outside. Actually, it's nice weather in Southern California. So go outside in the backyard and enjoy the warmth, the sunshine, the breeze, the sounds of the birds. But things are changed now for sure. And even when we return back to what we might want to say is normalcy, it's not going to be normal. There are certain things that are going to be permanently changed. I heard some people discussing it today on the radio. Will we ever have salad bars again? We may never have the buffets that you go in line and scoop up your own food. Who knows? Because we all end up handling the same utensils, and you wouldn't do it now with the COVID-19. And so if COVID-19 was, once it's over, people will still perhaps question whether that's a good idea. That's just one example. But look for opportunity in change. So you're at home, you can think of creative things to do. You can do like I do. I'm looking at projects around the house. When we're going to the store and going to socialize and going to school and going to work, we don't have time to do all the things that need to be done at home. So We found an opportunity to do some things at home that we never would have found an opportunity to do. This morning, I was involved in, I have two very large pine trees in front of my house, and they have dropped quite a few pine cones and needles, and the roof was full of it. So we spent this morning cleaning the roof, cleaning pine needles and pine cones and all of that residue from the trees off the roof of the house. We may never have done that if we weren't confined to staying at home. So change gives you opportunities to do things that you might not otherwise do. Let me talk. Let me read what I wrote about change back 23 years ago while I was, I found it right here. Change. This is what I wrote. As the seconds tick away, my life is changing. The change is so gradual that I do not recognize it. But when I look over the past year, 5 years, the last decade, or the past 2 decades of my life, I notice the difference. If I am yet moving on my path of success and continuing to enjoy life, the change is for the better. Each new moment brings with it a new set of circumstances. And in each new set is another chance to move closer to my goals. Each day, I will look for the new opportunity and continue to move forward. If I recognize change and resist it, I will become a casualty of it. The force of change will eventually run me down when I bristle up and try to stop it. I cannot stop time, so I cannot stop the change that it carries with it. Instead of resisting, I should determine its direction and harness its power for my benefit. Sometimes change is sudden. If I face change that is sudden and dramatic, I must not fear or fight it. Rather, I can permit it to push me out of my sphere of comfort. I can allow it to snatch from me my security blanket. The exposure to new conditions can help to reaffirm my resolve to obtain the most out of life, and it can strengthen my will to succeed. Change is inevitable, so I should plan for it. I can establish my course to success in a way that includes several options that I can readily take when there is a change in circumstances. I can be prepared mentally for change. That is, I can keep my imagination roaming the field of possibilities. So keep in mind that it's okay for things to change. You can benefit from change. All you have to do is look for that opportunity. Remember Anton's words, when you change your environment, you change your opportunities. The third word. So we've covered challenge, we've covered change. The third word is can. And the reason why I include can in the presentation, it's one of those things that I had to keep in mind at all times. It was very important for me to keep it in mind because it is not what I heard. What I heard was the opposite. over and over again, I heard, he's blind, he can't. No matter what level of my development, I heard it from my brothers and sisters when I wanted to go out and play with them. They would tell me I was blind. I can't. When I applied to college, I applied to 6 colleges when I was in high school, and a senior in high school. I applied to 6 colleges, and I was rejected from one. I don't know what the basis was for the rejection. Could very well be what could have been the basis from Yale. I ended up going to Yale, but Yale did not initially accept my application. They didn't even consider. We had 3 students from our high school who had applied to Yale, and when the results were posted, one of our schoolmates who was a year ahead of us, he looked at the public posting, and it showed that Maurice was accepted, Eugene was rejected, and Dana Lamont was not considered. And we learned that I wasn't considered by Yale's admission committee because I was blind, and they had never had a blind student before. So that was their way of, well, he's blind, we don't know if he can. We convinced them through letters and arguments, and I was accepted and did go to Yale. But when I applied to USC, the dean of admissions said, well, we've never had a blind student before. We don't know if you can do it. I told him that the only way he's going to know is to let me in. So he let me in. But when I applied for jobs, I applied with the Attorney General's office, the state Attorney General. They said, because you're blind, we won't hire you. I applied to the LA District Attorney's office. You're blind. You won't be able to do what we ask our first-year lawyers to do. I applied to the City Attorney's office, LA City Attorney, where I had worked for the summers, my summer breaks in law school. I worked for the City Attorney. But when I applied for a full-time job, you're blind. And you can't do what we usually have our first-year lawyers do. So I heard throughout my life a lot of, you can't, or we don't believe you can. So it was important for me to remind myself that I can. Blindness to me wasn't a barrier. It wasn't a thing that says, oh, because you're blind, you can't. Blindness to me was, as I said earlier, it was a challenge. And so the challenge was for me to figure out, how do you do it even though you're blind? And that was very important because when I went to school, I graduated from high school. This year, we're actually celebrating our 50-year anniversary of graduating from high school. So 50 years ago, I graduated from high school. Now, understand that the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed only 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So when I went to school, there was no Americans with Disabilities Act. There was no act. We used to work under what is called the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. That didn't exist when I started going to college. So I had to figure out all of my own accommodations. Yale let me in, but it was my job to figure out how I was going to do the work. How I was going to take the exams. How was I going to read the material? How was I going to get the material in Braille or record it? That was my job. The only way I would be able to do it is that I believed that I can. That there was no doubt in my mind. I believe that I can. And so I do. And I take that approach even today, no matter what it is. If I believe that I can, then I will do it. A nice little thing happened. What was it? 7 years ago, I had the chance to, or maybe it was longer than 7. Maybe it was 9 years ago. We won't worry about the year it happened. But I actually had a chance to fly an airplane. Uh, I had mentioned to someone that I wanted to fly a plane. I didn't know she was a pilot, and I didn't know that her husband trained pilots. But I mentioned that I wanted to fly a plane, and she told her husband. Her husband says, "I think I figured out how I can help Dana fly a plane." So I flew a plane around Antelope Valley. I actually did it twice. I flew around. I did circles around Antelope Valley the first time, and the second time actually flew from Lancaster to Tehachapi and then flew back. So if you believe that you can, then the only thing remains is for you to map out the way to do it. So getting through challenges, working through change situations, it's important that you have the confidence in your own abilities. Your abilities are yours. Don't look at what other people's abilities. It's not a question of, can you do the same thing Dana does? It's, can you do what you do? Can you do what Rocio does? Can you do what George does? Can you do what Ilana does? It's you, and you have to figure out what are those abilities that you have, and believe. You actually have to have it committed. I can. Because there will be so many circumstances or situations that might want to suggest to you that you cannot. So let me read about what I wrote about I can. About can. And that is believing in your own abilities. I can't stress that enough, how important that is. Because you'll even have your own friends might talk about what you can't do. And it's important that you can. The opening statement to can says, believe that you can, and you will. Here's what I wrote. I can. I must affirm these words whenever I hear someone else say that I cannot. Not only must I say them to myself, but I must communicate them verbally and by actions to the inevitable skeptics who believe otherwise. I must do more than affirm that I can. I must believe it. I must believe that I can enjoy the abundance of life, that I can be a complete person despite my incomplete body, and that I can do whatever it is that I desire to do. No one can believe it for me. It is necessary to have family and friends who will be around to remind me that I can when I am discouraged. Those who would encourage me can only stand in agreement with me. I must be the first to believe that I can. It is my human nature to avoid failure. Hence, I would never begin a task that I did not believe that I could actually perform. If at the outset I am convinced that the result of my actions will be fruitless, I will not make an attempt to do it. Believing that I can do is the spark that initiates my actions. The thought, I can, is not a belief that I am omnipotent and immune to failure. It is the expression of my confidence that my actions will net the result that I intend. Such confidence comes from knowledge, knowing who I am, knowing what I want, knowing how to put the two together. Having such confidence, I will know when I have reached my limitations and must call on the omnipotent. Okay, that was a little challenging in reading it. But believing that you can, believing that the power is within you is important in order for you to succeed through the challenging times. All right, I've covered 3: challenge, change, can, and now cause. Now, I put the word cause in there because it starts with C, and I was hoping that you catch it, that we have 4 C's, and it'll be easier for you to remember the 4 words that I cover in this presentation. Cause is really the issue of purpose. What is your purpose? I believe that everyone placed on this earth was placed here with a purpose. And so if you keep in mind what your purpose is, notwithstanding the circumstances, no matter what the circumstances are, if you keep purpose in mind, you will be able to make it through the situation that you find yourself in. The cause. You know, a lot of people, the way they say it, they'll say, what is your why? I don't like that phrase, what is your why? Because why is a question. I don't want to know what your question is. I want to know what your answer is. So I like to think, what is your because? I'm doing this because I'm in Girls Build because Girls Build has chosen this project because, and so you keep in mind your because or your cause, then when you confront obstacles or challenges, it will help you overcome those obstacles, to work around them, to work through them. And it has been a challenge as we work with Girls Build. I mean, how do we do our project that we would plan if our project involves going outside and helping others, face-to-face contact with planting trees, for example, or face-to-face contact with feeding the hungry, or encouraging people to vote, or encouraging young ladies to go into the science field. How do you do that in these challenging times? Well, when you remember why you're doing it, then you can find the alternatives. How do we do it virtually? How do we do it remotely and still accomplish it? You can use that same principle with everything, remembering why you're doing it, and then you can then work out the way. In your new situation, you can work out the way to do it. So here's what I write about purpose. There is a reason for my living. The creative mind of the universe, in a grand design of abundance, chose the time that my body, mind, and soul should come together. My universal purpose of life is to enhance the lives of others. Given that I have a free will, I choose whether or not to fulfill that purpose. Choosing to fulfill my purpose in life, I must discover the means by which I will accomplish it. My individual purpose is the role that I assume in the effort of fulfilling the universal design. My purpose is not dictated by my creator. Rather, it is determined by my abilities and my desires. To discover my purpose, I must look first to the abilities and talents with which I've been endowed. The means by which I uniquely enhance life cannot be beyond the functional abilities and special talents given to me by the Creator. If my purpose existed beyond my abilities, life would be frustrating rather than fulfilling. I next must consider my desires for life. For life to be fulfilling, it must be joyful and full of love. There can be no joy if my desires are not satisfied. When I have identified the things that make me happy and feel love in the context of what I am capable of doing, I will have discovered purpose. I also discover that individual mission can be multifaceted and it can change as my skills and knowledge and relationships change. Knowing the universal purpose and my individual mission helps me to set my goals. Understanding why I am moving in the direction that I am going makes it simpler to make adjustments in my plans as I confront unforeseen situations. Knowing my mission, I have a reason to hope in the face of despair. Sharing my mission with others will help me to identify those who are with me and those who will work against me. My life is unique, and its role in fulfilling the universal purpose can be played only by me. If I do not perform my specific role, it will be left undone. That's an important consideration too. Each of us has our own specific role, and if we don't play it, then it gets left undone. So don't let the circumstance that we find ourselves in now discourage you. Always maintain hope and remember your cause or your because. I've now covered the four. Challenge. We're all going to face challenges. It's a test of our strength and our ability. Change. That's the opportunity to do something new. Can. Believing in your own abilities and what you're capable of doing. And cause. Knowing the purpose and keeping that purpose in your mind. All right, I can now take questions.
Does anyone have any questions? You can unmute yourself or type it in the chat and we'll read it. Unmuting would be preferred.
I'm saying meeting will be better for questions. So you can hear it instead of reading it.
Oh. Yeah, we get through the chat.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to thank you for all of your words of wisdom. I'm an advisor for the La Cañada Girls Who Code, and I just want to thank you so much for all the inspiration that you are offering us today. I can totally feel your energy and positivity and want to spread this throughout a lot of my students who are having some challenges, who are questioning their abilities, and who are also forgetting their purpose. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
I want to thank you as well, and I love the inspiration, and I love how you put it into digestible bits with the challenge, the change, the can, and the cause. I think that sticks with me. That's something I want to share with friends and students alike. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I would like to thank you too. I mean, for me, I'm a senior in high school, and so we're not, formally graduating or anything this year, and we're going off to college, and so it's kind of hard to like find our own identity this year, and with everything going on. So I think it was really helpful for me throughout this to like reestablish my purpose in the different facets of my life. So I really appreciated it.
Good, and I wish you much success. When I was a senior in high school, the teachers went on strike. And we didn't know how long they would be on strike, so there's a question of whether we were going to do graduation. But they went back to work before graduation, so we did have that opportunity. But this is a different kind of thing we face, so it's we just have to do things in a different way.
Yeah, thank you.
I should have turned that off. Any more?
I also want to thank you for giving this speech. It's very inspirational. I find myself sort of like just not more like I don't even know how to say it, but what I'm trying to say is that I feel demoralized because I'm at home and in the confines of my home, and it's difficult to sort of do the things that we want to do, and it's sort of hard to visualize progress in our lives when we're stuck here. But you sort of reminded me to embrace the decisions I can make for a better future for myself.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And you know what I find? It's actually when I'm home and I about all of those other things is when I start thinking. It gives me a chance to think about different situations, about what I've done in the past and how I might make it better. One of the other books that I wrote was the Excellence book, and in it, principle number 1 of the Excellence book said to excel is to do better today than you did yesterday. So I use those times when you're confined to home is a chance to think about, okay, how can I do better? When I return to school, for example, how can I do things differently than I've done them up to now? It's a golden opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Lamont, for speaking. It's been very inspiring. I think it's something that we really need to hear during this time. And the way that you introduced everything made it so that it helps each individual person, but also applies to all of us. So it was really great. Good job. Thank you for everyone for coming. You can still ask questions.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are we closed, Erica?
No,
Are there any other questions?
Oh, okay. Well, I have a specific question, kind of. But when you lost your sight, did you did your other senses develop more? Do you think naturally, or was it you put more work into them because you didn't have the sight? And then I don't know.
I think it's the second part of your question. A lot of people ask me that throughout my life. Are your senses seem to be stronger? Yes, they seem to be, but I don't know if I can't say that they developed to be stronger, what I can say is that I relied on them more.
Yeah.
And so through use, I learned how to make them more beneficial, let's say. You know, the eyesight is predominant, and we rely a lot on what we see. And so we don't appreciate the sense of smell, for example. I mean, I remember in one of my lessons, my mobility lessons, I was required to find a particular business. I was walking down Hollywood Boulevard, and I was required to find the Orange Julius. This was back in, we're going way back in the late 60s. I was required to find the Orange Julius. Well, I knew the Orange Julius had a specific scent to it because of the oranges, and so I used my nose to find it. I didn't know where it was, and the teacher didn't tell me where it was, but I used my nose to find out when I was near it. So I think it's because I had to use those senses that they seem stronger. I don't know if that in a physiological sense, were they actually stronger? I don't know that.
Mm-hmm. That kind of goes along the lines of one of the lessons I'm learning with this whole quarantine, which is like not to take what you like have at the time for granted, because there were so many things like the choir I was involved in and just a lot of activities that I took for granted that I'm now learning to appreciate more.
Right. That happens to us. We get so caught up in our routine, day to day. You know, we get up, we go to school, and we go to this class, we go to that class, and we do this homework, and we come home and we watch our videos, and we get into a routine, and we do assume that everything is just going to move along nicely like this. And then something comes along that kind of shakes up everybody. As I said earlier, from I was going to say from the White House, not just the White House, from the government office of all countries down to every little citizen. It's shaking things up, and in many ways that's a good thing. It breaks it when we are broken out of our routine. We look for creative ways. I mean, I've been reading articles on how the creative research that universities are doing and things of that sort that they would not have done otherwise. So it's good in that sense. In fact, I was thinking maybe it's a good idea if we set aside after the COVID whole situation is over, maybe set aside every year, like 1 week, everybody just stays at home.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can tolerate it if we know that it's only going to be 1 week. It's finite. The challenges that we face now, and perhaps the challenge that George spoke of, is that we don't know how long it's going to be. But if we could say it's only going to be 1 week, we'd say, okay, I can make it through that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the uncertainty. We don't really like uncertainty. You see that expressed in the stock market. Market goes down when there's uncertainty. And humans are the same way. We feel much, much better with certainty.
So this is Miss G again from La Cañada. I am a Muslim, and right now it's Ramadan,
Yes.
which presents its own challenge for many people. So it is, yes, an opportunity for resetting and to really think about what you can do and what your purpose is. And so I found this really relevant to the current situation, not only COVID, but the fact that there are people who are not eating, who don't have homes, who are affected by this situation, even much more than many people who are on this call.
Right.
And I think that is so important to understand, that you're not only facing this challenge of having to stay at home, but there are people who are facing much bigger challenges than you are.
That is true. Thank you. Anyone else want to contribute? Ask questions? Well, if you find yourself, you can always communicate with me. I'm not hiding. Dana.lamon@gmail.com. You can send me an email and ask a question. Dana, D-A-N-A .Lamon, L-A-M-O-N @gmail.com.
And thank you, Jocelyn, Valeria, Miss Gail, Deanna, Stephanie, America, George, Erica, Alana, Miss Young, everyone for coming, Mr. Lamont for speaking. It's really nice to be able to connect with other people, especially during this time. And our team was struggling to figure out what we can do, especially being socially distanced. So it's really nice for us to be able to present this to the people. And thank you, Mr. Lamont, for being able to speak and impact us all. And it's just been really nice having everyone and being able to connect and learn something and get a new perspective about what's going on, be motivated. Thank you.
My pleasure to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you to everybody.